I said yes before I fully understood what I was agreeing to. That's the part that still lingers with me. The hesitation that should have been a warning, but instead became an invitation. It didn't happen all at once. Nothing like that ever does. It builds quietly, in the spaces where something is missing, in the moments no one else notices. From the outside, my life looked fine. Stable, predictable, even comfortable. My husband and I had been married long enough to understand each other without speaking much. At least that's what I used to tell myself. In reality, we had just stopped trying. Conversations turned into routine exchanges: what to eat, what to fix, what needed to be done next. There was no tension, no arguments, but there was also no warmth. It was like living beside someone instead of with them. Evenings were the hardest. He would come home tired, distracted, already halfway absorbed in his phone or work. I stopped expecting anything more than a brief acknowledgement. At some point, I stopped trying to offer more too. It became easier that way. Less disappointing. That's when he started coming around more often. My husband's younger friend. At first, he was just another familiar face, someone who dropped by occasionally, shared a few laughs and left. I didn't pay much attention to him. There was no reason to. But slowly I began to notice things I hadn't before. The way he listened when I spoke, not just hearing but actually paying attention. The way he asked questions, small ones, like he was trying to understand rather than just respond. It caught me off guard the first time, and even more the second that I told myself it was nothing. Just basic politeness. Something I had forgotten how to recognize because it had been missing for so long. Still, there were moments. Brief, almost insignificant on their own. A glance that lasted a second longer than it should have. A pause in conversation that felt heavier than silence. I started becoming aware of those moments in a way I couldn't explain. That I kept my distance, at least in my mind. I reminded myself of who he was, of the lines that shouldn't be crossed. And for a while that was enough. We stayed within the boundaries of casual conversation, nothing more. But there was a shift I couldn't ignore. It happened gradually, like everything else. Conversations became longer. Less about surface-level things and more about thoughts, feelings, things that mattered. I didn't realize how much I missed being asked how I felt until someone actually did. One evening, my husband stepped out to take a call, leaving the two of us alone. It wasn't unusual, but the silence that followed felt different. He looked at me like he wanted to say something, then hesitated. I remember thinking that whatever came next would change something. I didn't know what, but I felt it. He started carefully, almost unsure of himself. Not casual, not joking, serious in a way I hadn't seen before. He told me there was something he'd been thinking about, something he wanted to ask. I could hear the tension in his voice, the way he chose each word like it mattered. I should have stopped him right there. I know that now, but I didn't. Instead, I let him continue. When he finally said it, he didn't explain everything. Not completely. He framed it as a wish, something personal, something he wasn't sure he should even be saying out loud. The details were vague, but the meaning behind it wasn't. It was enough to understand that it crossed a line. For a moment, everything went quiet. Not around us, but inside me. My first instinct was to reject it, to shut it down before it became something real. But that's not what happened. What surprised me wasn't the request itself. It was my reaction to it. That I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel outrage. I felt something else. Something closer to curiosity, mixed with a strange sense of being seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. That I told myself it was wrong. I repeated that in my head more than once. But at the same time, I didn't walk away. I didn't end the conversation. I stayed there listening, thinking that he didn't push. He didn't try to convince me. He just let the question exist between us, unfinished. And somehow that made it harder to ignore. When my husband came back, everything returned to normal on the surface. The conversation shifted, the moment disappeared. But it didn't really go away. It stayed with me, replaying in my mind long after he left. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about why it affected me the way it did. It wasn't just about what he asked, it was about what it revealed. About the parts of me I had ignored for so long that I tried to dismiss it the next day. To convince myself it was a one-time thing, something that wouldn't happen again. But deep down I knew it wasn't that simple, because I hadn't said no. And that silence, that hesitation, it meant more than I wanted to admit. I tried to go back to normal after that, but normal didn't feel the same anymore. Once something shifts inside you even slightly, it changes how everything else feels. The house was still the same, my routine hadn't changed, my husband hadn't changed, but I had, and that made all the difference. At first, I avoided thinking about it. I kept myself busy, filled my time with small distractions, anything that would stop my mind from circling back to that moment. But it didn't work. The more I tried to ignore it, the more present it became. What unsettled me the most wasn't what he said. It was how I felt when he said it. I kept replaying it in my head, not because I was shocked, but because a part of me had responded in a way I didn't expect. That part didn't feel offended. It felt noticed. That realization made me uncomfortable that I started paying more attention to everything around me, especially my husband. I watched how he spoke to me, how little he asked, how quickly conversations ended. I noticed the distance more clearly now, like it had been there all along, but I had finally adjusted the focus. It wasn't that he was a bad person. He wasn't. He just stopped seeing me somewhere along the way. Or maybe I stopped letting myself be seen. I don't know which came first. A few days passed before I saw his friend again. I told myself I would keep things simple, distant, unchanged. I had already decided that whatever happened before would stay there, unspoken and unresolved. But the moment he walked in, I felt that same awareness return. It wasn't obvious to anyone else. We didn't act differently, didn't say anything unusual. But there was something unspoken between us now, something that hadn't been there before. We talked like we always did, but it didn't feel the same. Every word carried weight, every pause stretched a little longer. I found myself noticing the way he looked at me, not boldly, not in a way that crossed a line, but with a kind of quiet attention that made it hard to look away. I kept reminding myself that this was exactly how things start, small, almost invisible shifts that don't seem dangerous until they are. At one point, my husband left the room again, briefly, casually, without a second thought. And once again it was just the two of us. This time neither of us spoke right away. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like both of us were aware of the same thing but waiting for the other to acknowledge it first. He didn't repeat the question immediately. Instead, he spoke about something else, something personal. He shared things about himself I hadn't heard before. Not dramatic things, just honest ones. It felt real in a way that caught me off guard. I listened, and without realizing it, I started opening up too. Not everything, but enough. Enough to blur the line I had been trying to hold on to. That's when I understood the real problem. It wasn't just about a single moment or a single request. It was about what was building underneath it, something quieter, deeper, harder to define. When he finally brought it up again, it didn't feel sudden. It felt like a continuation of something that had already started. This time he was clearer. Not forceful, not demanding, just honest. He explained what he meant, why he said it, what it represented to him. It wasn't framed as something reckless, but as something intentional that made it harder to dismiss. I felt the conflict immediately. One part of me wanted to shut it down, to draw a clear line and step back before it went any further. But another part of me, the part one didn't want to admit existed, was still listening. Still considering. I asked myself questions I didn't have answers to. Why did it matter so much? Why did his words stay with me longer than they should? Why did I feel more present in these conversations than I had in years? I knew what was right. That part was clear. But knowing and feeling aren't always the same thing. After he left, I sat with it again just like before. Only this time it felt heavier. More real. Like I was running out of space to pretend it didn't mean anything. That night my husband spoke to me about something trivial, something I normally would have responded to without thinking. But I found myself distracted, distant in a way I hadn't been before. For the first time, I wondered if he would notice that he didn't. And somehow that made everything harder, because it confirmed what I had been trying not to admit. There was a gap in my life, and someone else had stepped close enough to make me see it clearly. I stood in that realization longer than I should have. Long enough for the question to change from "is this wrong?" to something far more dangerous. Why does it feel right? That's when I knew I was no longer just reacting. I was deciding. And even before I said anything out loud, I could feel that whatever choice I made next wouldn't be small. The moment I said yes wasn't dramatic. There was no rush, no overwhelming surge of emotion, no sense of something breaking all at once. It was quieter than that, almost calm. And somehow that made it more serious. I remember looking at him, knowing exactly what I was agreeing to this time. There was no confusion left, No space to pretend I didn't understand. He didn't repeat the question again. He didn't need to. It had been sitting between us long enough to take shape on its own. For a brief second, I thought about all the reasons I should refuse. The years behind me, the life I had built, the lines that once felt unmovable. But those thoughts didn't stay long. They passed through my mind like distant noise, not strong enough to stop what had already started forming inside me, so I said it. Not loudly, not impulsively, just enough for him to hear. And that was it. One word spoken quietly, but it carried more weight than anything I had said in a long time. What surprised me wasn't him. It was myself. I expected to feel immediate regret or panic or at least hesitation right after. But instead there was a strange stillness. Like I had stepped into something I had been circling for a while. He didn't react the way I thought he would either. There was no excitement, no visible relief. Just a subtle shift in his expression, something deeper, more focused. It made everything feel even more real. For a while we didn't say much after that. There wasn't anything left to explain. The decision had already said enough. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with awareness of what had just happened, of what it meant, of what couldn't be undone anymore. And that's when the second wave hit. Not immediately, but gradually, as the moment settled into reality. I started to feel it in small ways first. A slight tension in my chest. A heightened awareness of everything around me. Every sound, every movement suddenly felt sharper. That I became aware of time again. How long we had been there, how easily someone could walk in, how normal everything needed to look if they did. That awareness stayed with me even after I left. When I saw my husband later that day, nothing about him had changed. He spoke the same way, moved the same way, completely unaware of anything different. But I couldn't see him the same way anymore. Not because of what he had done, but because of what I had. There was a distance now, one that didn't come from him this time. It came from me. From the knowledge I was carrying, the choice I had made without him even realizing it. I started noticing details I never paid attention to before. The way he didn't look up when I entered the room. The way conversations ended before they even began. Things that once felt normal now felt incomplete. And in contrast, everything about the other situation felt amplified. Not necessarily better, but more intense. More present. That contrast was dangerous. Over the next few days I found myself caught between two versions of reality. One that was familiar, predictable, safe. And another that was uncertain, complicated, but impossible to ignore. What made it worse was that nothing outwardly had changed. There were no obvious signs, no visible consequences yet. Life continued as it always had. But internally, everything was shifting. I started questioning things I hadn't questioned before. Not just my marriage, but myself. The kind of person I believed I was, the boundaries I thought I would never cross. It's easy to think you know yourself when you've never been tested. It's different when you are. And then there was him. His behavior didn't become careless or obvious. If anything, he became more controlled. More aware. There were no unnecessary conversations. No moments that could draw attention. But the connection we had acknowledged didn't disappear. It just changed form. It showed up in brief exchanges, in subtle looks, in the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. It was quieter now, but stronger in a way that made it harder to ignore. That's when I realized something I hadn't considered before. Saying yes wasn't the end of the decision. It was the beginning of something that would keep asking for more attention, more risk, more justification. And the scariest part was that each step after that would feel easier than the last. I told myself I could control it. That I could keep it contained, limit it to what it already was. But even as I thought that, I knew it wasn't true, because the line I once relied on was already behind me. And once you cross something like that, you don't go back to where you were, you just keep moving forward whether you're ready or not. After that, things didn't fall apart the way I once imagined they would. There was no sudden confrontation, no dramatic discovery, no moment where everything came crashing down at once. Instead, it stretched out quietly, almost patiently, as if waiting for me to realize what I had already set in motion. First, I convinced myself I had control over it, that what happened could stay contained, limited to a moment, a decision I could isolate from the rest of my life. I told myself it didn't have to become anything bigger. But control is easy to believe in before it's tested. Days passed, and everything on the surface remained unchanged. My husband continued with his routines, unaware, distant in the same familiar way. The house felt the same, the conversations sounded the same. If anyone had looked from the outside, they wouldn't have seen anything different. But I felt it showed up in the smallest details. The way I hesitated before speaking. The way I became more aware of my own tone, my own movements, as if I had something to hide. Even when no one was looking. It wasn't fear of being caught that unsettled me the most. It was the awareness of myself that I started noticing how easily I adjusted. How quickly something that once felt unthinkable had become something I was learning to carry. That realization stayed with me longer than anything else. He didn't disappear after that. He didn't push either. If anything, he became more careful, more distant in a way that made everything feel even more deliberate. We didn't seek each other out openly, but there was an understanding now. Something unspoken but present. And that presence was enough to change how everything else felt. The tension didn't come from what we did. It came from what existed beneath it. The awareness, the shared knowledge, the fact that something had been acknowledged and couldn't be undone at the same time. My marriage didn't suddenly improve or collapse. It simply continued, unchanged in all the ways that had once made me feel invisible. Only now I couldn't ignore it anymore. That was the real shift. Before I had accepted the distance as normal. Now I saw it clearly. Every missed glance, every half-finished conversation, every moment where I felt like I wasn't fully there. It all stood out in a way it never had before. I started asking myself questions I had avoided for years. Not about him, not even about what happened, but about me. When did I stop expecting more? When did I decide this was enough? And why did it take something like this to make me realize it? The answers weren't simple and they didn't come all at once. But one thing became clear, I couldn't go back to not knowing. Then came the moment I didn't expect. It wasn't loud or confrontational. It was subtle, almost easy to miss. My husband looked at me one evening longer than usual. Not suspicious, not accusing, just observant. And for the first time in a long time I felt seen by him. It caught me off guard. There was no question that followed, no accusation. He just asked if everything was okay. A simple question, one he hadn't asked in a while. I should have answered quickly. Said yes, moved on, kept everything exactly where it was. But I hesitated. And in that hesitation I realized something that unsettled me more than anything else. It wasn't just that I had crossed a line. It was that I had been standing near it for much longer than I ever admitted. What happened didn't create something new, it revealed something that was already there. The distance, the silence, the parts of myself I had ignored. All of it existed long before that moment. I just chose not to see it. Now I couldn't unsee it. The situation with his friend, the decision I made, it wasn't something I could neatly label as right or wrong and move past. It became part of how I understood myself, my choices, my limits. And the truth is, I still don't have a clean answer. I don't know if I regret it in the way people expect. I don't know if I would undo it if I had the chance. What I do know is that it changed how I see everything. Not just my marriage, myself. Because once you realize what you're capable of, once you see the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, you don't get to forget them again. You carry them with you. Quietly. In the same way it all began.